Here is the hook tailored exactly to the file approach and structure, direct, with tension and designed for maximum retention. What if I told you that the FIA is investigating something that could completely change Formula One? But that might not technically be illegal? Mercedes has found a way to squeeze the MGU-K to a point that no one else can follow. An advantage so big that it is already generating suspicion within the paddock, indirect statements from drivers, and now a new official investigation that could end in scandal. Because this is not a simple improvement, it is a trick that allows them to be practically unbeatable in classification. And the big question is, are we facing a masterpiece of engineering, or the biggest legal loophole exploited in the new era of Formula One? Stay, because what's happening with Mercedes MGU-K not only explains its dominance, it could force the FIA to intervene before it's too late. The beginning of this story is not on a track, nor in a classification, nor even in a victory. It is in the regulations, in a line that seemed insignificant and that today has the entire Formula One on high alert. Because while most teams were trying to understand the new era of 2026, there was one that went further. One that not only interpreted the rules but found how to bend them without breaking them. The technical revolution of 2026 completely changed the DNA of the category, eliminating the MGU-H and placing all the focus on the MGU-K, a system that went from being a support to becoming the heart of performance. Now, almost 50% of the car's power depends directly on this component, which means that whoever masters it dominates Formula One. And in this new scenario, Mercedes not only understood the system better than anyone, it took it to a level that the rest simply cannot replicate. While other teams were struggling to manage power delivery, adapt to the new loss of power when the system runs out and minimize that brutal drop in speed that can reach up to 30 kilometers per hour, Mercedes found a way to avoid that problem at the most important moment, the qualifying lap. And this is where everything starts to take a completely unexpected turn. The regulations are clear, or at least it seemed that way. When the MGU-K runs out of power, the power must be reduced progressively in a kind of controlled deflation that protects the stability of the car. But hidden within that same regulation there is an exception, a clause designed for emergencies, for critical failures, a backdoor that no one considered dangerous until now. And Mercedes opened it, not as a reaction, but as a strategy. Because instead of following the progressive reduction as the rule dictates, they have found a way to use that instant cut allowed in emergency situations right at the exact moment when it matters most, the end of the fastest lap. This allows them to maintain maximum energy deployment for longer than any other equipment, stretching those 350 kilowatts to the last meter of the circuit, when the rest is already losing performance. The difference is not small. It is not an isolated tenth. It is a structural advantage that completely changes the hierarchy in classification, and that has begun to generate something that in Formula One always marks the beginning of a storm: suspicions. Within the paddock we no longer talk only about performance, we talk about how they are achieving it. There is talk of an advantage that does not fit with the logic of the rest of the developments. And most importantly, we are talking about a system that, although legal on paper, could be breaking the spirit of the regulations. That is why the FIA has decided to intervene. Not because there is an obvious trap, but because what Mercedes has done is much more dangerous, finding a void that no one else saw and turning it into a decisive weapon. And this is where the conflict becomes real, because if this is confirmed as a valid interpretation, we are not facing a simple technical advantage. We are facing a paradigm shift that will force all teams to react or be left behind. But if the FIA decides that this crosses the line, then we will not only be facing an investigation, we will be at the beginning of a technical war that can redefine the entire season. The difference that Mercedes is generating does not remain in the data or in theory, it is being seen directly on the track, especially in qualifying, where the management of the MGU-K makes the difference between being on pole or losing tenths that are impossible to recover. And this is where the real problem begins for the rest of the teams, because it is not about copying an aerodynamic improvement or finding a better setup. It is about replicating an interpretation of the regulations that not everyone is willing or able to execute. Ferrari, for example, has been one of the teams that has suffered the most from this impact. The difference is not only visible, it is frustrating, because while they must begin to reduce power before finishing the lap to comply with the regulations, Mercedes continues pushing with all the energy available until the last moment. And that generates a feeling within the paddock that is always dangerous in Formula One, the feeling of technical injustice. But this doesn't just stop at Ferrari. Other teams like Red Bull have also detected what is happening, and although some have tried to explore similar paths, Mercedes' execution seems to be on another level, which has led to a situation where the grid is beginning to divide into two groups. those who understand the system, and those who simply suffer from it. And this is where the human factor comes in. Because when even drivers begin to publicly point out the performance of a rival, when indirect comments begin to emerge, when it is suggested that there is something strange in the way a car delivers power, it means that the pressure is no longer just technical, it is political. The FIA cannot ignore that kind of noise. And that is why this research is not born solely from the data, it is born from the context. From the accumulated pressure, from the doubts, from the real possibility that a team has found an advantage that breaks the competitive balance in a completely new era. But this is where the situation becomes even more complex. Because if the FIA decides to intervene, it has to answer an extremely delicate question. Is Mercedes breaking the rules, or is it simply being smarter than the rest? If they prohibit it, they would be punishing innovation. If they allow it, they would be validating an advantage that could make the season practically decided from the classification. And while that decision does not arrive, Mercedes continues to gain ground. He continues to perfect a system that not only gives them performance, but forces the rest to run after something they still don't fully understand. And that, in Formula One, is the worst possible position. Because when you don't know exactly what you're chasing, you're already losing. And this is where this whole story comes to its most critical point. Because it is no longer about understanding the trick, nor about seeing who copies it. It is about what the FIA is going to do with something that can change the destiny of the entire season. Because right now there are 3 possible paths, and none of them are easy. The first is for the FIA to decide that everything is completely legal, that Mercedes has simply been smarter, faster, more precise in interpreting the regulations. If that happens, the message for the rest of the grid is devastating. There is nothing to complain about, there is nothing to stop. All that remains is to copy or be left behind. And in that scenario, Mercedes would not only have an advantage, it would have time, margin, and total control to continue developing a system that is already, in itself, superior. The second path is much more explosive. Let the FIA determine that, although it does not break the letter of the rule, it does break its spirit, and decide to intervene. And this is where the real chaos begins, because changing or limiting this system mid-season would open a direct conflict with Mercedes, with possible protests, political tensions, and a very dangerous precedent within Formula One, that of redefining the limits when someone pushes them too far. But there is a third scenario, the quietest, the most typical of this sport, that the FIA does not directly prohibit the system, but limits it indirectly, adjusting the regulations, closing that legal loophole, modifying how and when that emergency clause can be used. A solution that does not point directly to Mercedes, but that, in practice, eliminates its advantage. And here is the most important thing of all. Because while that decision arrives, Mercedes continues to exploit that limit, continues to perfect a concept that the rest is barely beginning to understand. And every lap, every classification, every sector where they maintain those 350 kilowatts until the last meter, is a demonstration that they are not waiting for anyone. This is no longer just a technical advantage. It's a countdown. A countdown for the rest of the teams to react, or for the FIA to intervene, or for the championship to take a course that will later be impossible to change. Because if this system is maintained, we're not just seeing Mercedes' dominance. We are seeing the birth of a new way of winning in Formula One. And the final question is not whether this is legal or not. The real question is, how much longer can the FIA afford to do nothing? And in the end, it all comes down to something much bigger than a simple technical trick. This is a direct battle between innovation and the limits of the regulation, between what is written and what was really intended. Mercedes has not broken the rules, but he has done something that always generates discomfort in Formula One. He has found a way to take them to the extreme, to squeeze a forgotten clause until it becomes an advantage that no one else can match. And that is precisely what has forced the FIA to react. Because when a single team manages to convert an interpretation into such clear superiority, the problem stops being technical and becomes structural. We are no longer talking about who develops better, but rather about who understood before a gap that changes the rules of the game without officially changing them. What we are seeing is not just a controversy. It is the exact moment in which Formula One decides where it wants to go. Whether towards a category where limitless creativity defines the champion, or towards an environment where those limits must be closed to protect competitive equality. And while that decision does not arrive, Mercedes is still there, one step ahead, taking advantage of every lap, every classification, every opportunity to extend an advantage that could mark an entire era. Because in this sport, the difference between being brilliant and being unbeatable, sometimes it is hidden in a single line of the regulations. Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.